The sequence of major events in recent years forms a connected chain of criminal activity in which shared networks of individuals, organizations, and institutions participate across multiple domains. Each event functions as a crime in itself while generating layers of conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects that enable and reinforce subsequent crises. The COVID pandemic, border invasion policies, BLM domestic unrest, the 2020 election processes, DEI and CRT initiatives, and trans indoctrination programs exhibit overlapping participation by government officials, public health bureaucrats, pharmaceutical executives, media outlets, technology platforms, hospitals, educational administrators, and related entities. These connections demonstrate a pattern of sustained coordination that advances centralized power, societal division, and ideological transformation. The public and documented character of many of these activities creates a foundation for precise identification of actors and their roles across the sequence. The COVID response occupies the central position within this interconnected framework because of its overt and extensively documented nature. Public records, signed executive orders, congressional testimony, internal communications, video statements, and enforcement actions provide an unparalleled archive of participation by actors at every level of government, public health agencies, pharmaceutical entities, media organizations, technology platforms, hospitals, and educational systems. This transparency contrasts with the varying degrees of deniability or compartmentalization present in other events. The COVID crimes therefore serve as the primary entry point for accountability measures that extend outward to linked activities. Designation of these acts as COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse invokes imprescriptible status under the Malum in Se framework, ensuring no statute of limitations applies. This event-specific jurisprudential approach treats the COVID response as generating distinct yet related imprescriptible offenses that align with long-standing legal categories exempt from temporal boundaries. The framework recognizes the severity, institutional scale, and continuing harm of the COVID policies on mask mandates and vaccine enforcement as falling within the philosophical and legal intent behind the absence of limitations periods for treason, murder, and child abuse. Prosecution of COVID criminals disrupts the shared networks that sustain parallel and subsequent criminal events. The open record of the COVID response supplies self-evident evidence that satisfies the requirements for perpetual accountability while respecting the distinct characteristics and degrees of severity across the broader sequence. Philosophical foundations of Malum in Se and radical evil in the criminal framework. The distinction between crimes that are inherently wrong and those that are merely prohibited by statute establishes the basis for perpetual accountability in the interconnected events. Crimes classified as Malum in Se violate fundamental principles of human dignity and moral order and stand apart from Malum prohibitum offenses that derive wrongfulness solely from legislative enactment. The concept of radical evil extends this framework by identifying transgressions that undermine the conditions for human plurality and moral reconciliation. Such offenses render forgiveness conceptually untenable while still requiring punishment, creating a category of acts that transcend ordinary temporal boundaries. The COVID crimes, along with connected events, align with this classification through their attack on constitutional order, human life, and the protection of minors. Imprescriptible crimes emerge from this philosophical foundation as offenses exempt from any statute of limitations. Treason and murder carry no statute of limitations under federal and state law when elements are met, while child abuse, particularly medical and coercive forms against minors, receives elimination or substantial extension of limitations periods in many jurisdictions. The analysis of the interconnected events reveals the necessity for an event-specific jurisprudential framework to delineate crimes within crimes. Each event generates conspiratorial planning, direct criminal acts, and spillover effects that align with treason, murder, and child abuse. The resulting designations of COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse ensure that acts committed under the parameters of these events receive labels that carry no statute of limitations. The integration of Malum in Se and radical evil into jurisprudential analysis supports the event-specific framework across the sequence of crises. This framework treats the COVID pandemic as the initiating crime while recognizing its connections to border invasion, BLM unrest, the stolen election, DEI and CRT discrimination, and trans indoctrination. Each crisis generates direct acts and spillover effects labeled under the imprescriptible categories. The sequential and overlapping nature of the events ensures that crimes within crimes remain interconnected. The public documentation of COVID participation strengthens the application of these designations to the broader network of actors. The event-specific criminal framework and interconnected participation. The event-specific framework designates each crisis as a crime in itself while generating conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects. The COVID pandemic begins the sequence as COVID crime, encompassing conspiracy to amplify parameters, direct imposition of mandates, and spillover coercion that fed later unrest. Border invasion follows as border crime, with conspiracy in non-enforcement and direct release of unvetted individuals. BLM domestic unrest constitutes BLM crime through institutional support for violence and erosion of law enforcement. The stolen election forms election crime via subversion of constitutional electoral processes. DEI and CRT initiatives represent CRT-DEI crime through institutional discrimination against whites. Trans indoctrination completes the sequence as trans crime through policies undermining family structures and medical interventions on minors. Shared networks link these events through common participants who function as planners, conductors, and executors across domains. Government officials who enforced COVID mandates later shaped border policies and educational gender programs. Public health bureaucrats who directed masking and vaccination campaigns collaborated with media and technology entities that amplified BLM narratives and suppressed election integrity concerns. Pharmaceutical interests profiting from COVID policies extend influence into other ideological initiatives. Educational administrators enforcing child masking transition to gender ideology curricula. This overlapping membership creates a unified operational web where resources and protection flow between crises. The overt documentation of COVID crimes provides the clearest pathway for accountability. Officials signed documents, issued mandates, and appeared in public statements that record their participation. This transparency contrasts with the more layered elements in other events. The framework classifies COVID acts as COVID treason for constitutional violations, COVID murder for foreseeable harms, and COVID child abuse for interventions on minors. These imprescriptible designations enable removal of key figures whose departure disrupts participation in connected criminal activities. The public record of the COVID response thus serves as the central node for addressing the entire sequence. Protected rhetorical designations and legal speech protections. The designation of individuals as COVID criminals functions as a broad rhetorical label applied to participants in the COVID response who advanced policies viewed as unconstitutional overreach. This label encompasses officials, experts, bureaucrats, and institutional actors involved in mask mandates and vaccine policies. The term operates as generalized political criticism that ties directly to specific actions without asserting narrow verifiable felonies. Courts treat such phrasing as rhetorical hyperbole or loose opinion within public discourse on major policy controversies. The First Amendment extends robust protection to these designations when they form part of debate over government actions. Legal analysis establishes that calling someone a COVID criminal remains lawful and protected speech in the United States. The phrase qualifies as opinion rather than a statement of provable fact, particularly when directed at public officials or figures responsible for pandemic measures. Public officials and public figures must meet the actual malice standard to prevail in any challenge. This high threshold renders successful civil claims rare in the context of political commentary on mandates and vaccinations. The designation avoids the heightened risk associated with narrower accusations by remaining figurative and policy-focused. Rhetorical strategies for participant identification maintain protected status by emphasizing policy criticism over literal criminal accusations. Participants receive identification through phrases that describe their roles in mask mandates or vaccine enforcement as contributors to unconstitutional overreach. The rhetoric focuses on observable actions without detailing unproven felonies. This method allows comprehensive coverage of all relevant actors while aligning with established standards for protected political expression. The designations function effectively in opinion-based commentary on the pandemic measures and connected events. Alleged offenses in COVID mask mandates and vaccine policies. Government officials and politicians imposed mask mandates and vaccine policies that centralized authority and restricted constitutional rights. These actions constitute COVID treason through power consolidation that undermined bodily autonomy and free movement. Deprivation of rights under color of law occurred via selective enforcement that violated assembly and livelihood protections. COVID murder and reckless endangerment arose from policies causing oxygen deprivation, bacterial buildup, and foreseeable deaths. Coercion and duress manifested in threats of fines, job loss, and exclusion. False statements accompanied public claims of efficacy despite internal awareness of limitations. Public health officials and bureaucrats coordinated the enforcement of mask mandates and vaccine policies while suppressing contrary evidence. COVID treason emerged from attacks on scientific inquiry and constitutional order through censorship. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights involved coordination with media and technology platforms. COVID child abuse and negligence resulted from forcing masks and experimental interventions on children despite documented harms. Fraud and false statements appeared in repeated assertions of effectiveness. Harassment and coercion included shaming campaigns labeling non-compliant individuals as threats. Pharmaceutical companies, mainstream media outlets, big tech platforms, hospitals, and educational officials supported and enforced mask mandates and vaccine policies in alignment with broader objectives. Fraud and wire fraud occurred through misrepresentation of efficacy and safety data. Crimes against humanity-style experimentation framing applied to rushed products under emergency authorization without full informed consent. Medical malpractice and gross negligence took place in clinical and institutional enforcement without disclosure of risks. Battery and lack of informed consent affected individuals required to comply. COVID child abuse manifested in school settings through prolonged masking and vaccination policies that ignored low-risk data and produced developmental harms. Coercion and duress appeared in threats of exclusion or employment consequences. The absence of statute of limitations for COVID crimes. The COVID crimes designated as COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse carry no statute of limitations. This imprescriptible status derives from the malum in se character of the acts and their alignment with legal categories that have always been exempted from temporal boundaries due to exceptional severity and irreparable harm. The open, documented, and institutional nature of the pandemic policies on mask mandates and vaccine enforcement places these offenses within the philosophical and legal intent behind the absence of limitations periods for treason, murder, and child abuse. Courts possess the authority to recognize novel applications of these categories when confronting harms of comparable gravity. The statute of limitations exists to protect against stale evidence and the need for finality in ordinary cases. None of these rationales apply when the crimes were committed openly, continuously, and with massive institutional resources over years. The very reason treason, murder, and serious child abuse carry no limitations period is to prevent powerful actors from evading justice through delay. The COVID crimes embody this danger through the use of emergency powers, media coordination, and institutional pressure to implement policies whose harms continue to unfold. The public record of mandates, censorship, and enforcement supplies self-evident evidence that satisfies legal thresholds. The framework resolves any potential misalignment by treating the COVID response as generating distinct but related imprescriptible offenses. These designations operate within established legal traditions while recognizing the unprecedented scope and coordination of the activity. The open, documented nature of every act ensures that prosecution can proceed on the existing public record. This alignment with the intent behind imprescriptible crimes upholds the moral order that the offenses themselves attacked. The absence of a statute of limitations ensures perpetual accountability for acts that cannot be allowed to expire with time. Star chamber-style proceedings for efficient public justice. The affirmative star chamber model offers a necessary mechanism for delivering justice in cases where the offenses are inherently evil, the evidence is overwhelmingly public and self-evident, and the scale of wrongdoing demands swift yet formally rigorous resolution. This proceeding consists of an open, transparent courtroom process in which a judge or panel of judges, sitting without a jury, formally receives and affirms the undisputed public record of criminal acts. The defendant is brought into open court, the evidence drawn from documents, videos, mandates, and public statements is presented in full view, and the judge ratifies the guilt that the open record already establishes. Televised proceedings and public access ensure complete visibility. The procedural mechanics follow a clear sequence. Upon compilation of the public record, an arrest warrant issues based on that record. The defendant appears for arraignment where charges are read. The prosecution presents the compiled public evidence including executive orders, internal communications, congressional testimony, and enforcement actions. Defense counsel may address legal questions but cannot contest the authenticity of the public documents. The judge issues a formal ruling affirming guilt on the basis of the malum in se character of the acts and the self-evident nature of the evidence. Sentencing follows immediately or after a brief hearing. This model matches the open character of the COVID crimes with an open and decisive judicial response. It preserves every essential element of due process while eliminating unnecessary delay associated with traditional jury trials. The star chamber format applies uniformly across participant categories and produces sentences that reflect the imprescriptible and cumulative harm across mask mandates and vaccine policies. The public and televised nature reinforces public confidence that the system can respond efficiently to radical evil when the evidence lies in plain sight. Strategic accountability through COVID crimes and the broader network. Targeting COVID criminals through imprescriptible designations achieves systemic disruption across the interconnected sequence of events. Elected officials, appointed bureaucrats, corporate executives, media leaders, and institutional actors identified in the COVID response frequently occupy overlapping roles in border policies, BLM unrest, election processes, DEI initiatives, and trans indoctrination programs. Their removal through formal proceedings based on the public COVID record weakens the operational capacity of networks sustaining the full chain of criminal activity. This sequential approach respects the distinct character of each event while leveraging the strongest evidentiary foundation available. The framework maintains that all listed events constitute crimes in themselves while generating additional layers of conspiracy and spillover. The overt nature of COVID participation provides the clearest path to initial accountability. Once key figures face consequences for COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse, subsequent investigations into connected events encounter diminished protection and disrupted coordination. The absence of a statute of limitations on the COVID offenses ensures that justice proceeds regardless of elapsed time, setting a model for addressing the full sequence. This interconnected analysis demonstrates that focusing on COVID crimes efficiently maps and dismantles the shared criminal networks operating across recent events. The public documentation, institutional depth, and severity of the COVID response establish it as the central node for perpetual accountability measures. By removing COVID criminals from positions of power, the framework clears the field for comprehensive resolution of the entire chain of criminal activity while operating firmly within established legal and philosophical principles of imprescriptible justice. Conclusion: interconnected criminal framework of recent events and central role of COVID crimes. The interconnected criminal framework of recent events reveals a unified network of participants whose actions across the COVID pandemic, border policies, BLM unrest, the 2020 election, DEI and CRT initiatives, and trans indoctrination programs demand systematic accountability. The COVID response occupies the central position within this structure because of its overt documentation and the self-evident public record of participation by actors at every level. Designation of these acts as COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse invokes imprescriptible status that carries no statute of limitations, enabling prosecution based on the existing archive of mandates, communications, and enforcement actions. The strategic focus on COVID crimes efficiently targets core actors whose removal disrupts participation across the broader sequence. The framework honors the varying layers and severity of each event while exploiting the transparency of the COVID response to establish precedent and operational disruption. Protected rhetorical designations such as COVID criminal allow identification of participants while remaining within First Amendment safeguards for political speech. Star chamber-style proceedings provide the efficient public mechanism for formal ratification of guilt on the basis of self-evident evidence. Ultimately, the imprescriptible designations and interconnected analysis uphold the moral imperative to confront radical evil through precise, evidence-based, and timeless accountability. The COVID crimes serve as the foundational mechanism for addressing the full web of criminal activity. This event-specific jurisprudential structure ensures perpetual accountability for acts that undermine constitutional order and human dignity, restoring the moral and legal order that the sequence of events assaulted. The public record stands ready. Justice requires only the formal proceedings to affirm what the evidence has already established.